Hey there, I'd just like to ask before the video starts, if you like what you see, please give us a click on the like and subscribe buttons. Hello, everybody. Well, my guest today has had a few jobs in his working life. He was a journalist. He was a politician, leader of the New Democratic Party of Newfoundland and Labrador at one point. But for the bulk of his working life, he's been involved in the labor movement and was, in fact, the leader of the Fishery, Food and Allied Workers Union for many, many years. And he's written a book about the history of the union, a very interesting book which I read last year and decided I've got to have him on to talk about the history of this amazing union. And it's my pleasure to welcome Earle McCurdy to the program. Welcome, Earle.
Thanks very much, Karl. Good to be here.
The book is called A Match to a Blasty Bow. What's the significance of the title?
Well, I have to credit Richard Cashin for the phrase. Richard was interviewed one time about the union, and the interviewer asked what was the reaction in the early days when he and others set about organizing the union. And he said it was like a match to a blasty bough, which, of course, if you've got a blasty bough, which is dried out branch, and you fire a match on it, then poof, up it goes. Yeah. And so that was, I thought, a fairly colorful way to, and accurate way to explain it.
Absolutely. Now, back in the day before unions, the fish harvesters were pretty much at the mercy of two things. The size of the resource, which could change from year to year, and also they were at the mercy of the generosity of the fish merchants. And the industry operated on something called a truck system. Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, I might initially say the generosity or otherwise.
Or otherwise, yes.
Yeah, the truck system essentially was effectively a cashless society without Bitcoin. It was the merchant essentially controlled the economic life of the fisherman. He would set the price. He owned the store, first of all, in the community, the shop, in the community where the harvester would ply his trade. And he also bought the fish. And he would set not only the price he would pay for the fish, and usually he'd set that after the fact when the fish had been landed, but he would also set the price for the supplies that the fish harvester needed to get started. And that was not only household goods, but also things like salt and bait and other things he needed for his fishing enterprise. And so the merchant really controlled both ends of that equation, and the fisherman was left with whatever that produced, and it was quite common from the end of the year in the haul and to carry a debt forward into the next year, which meant he had no other choice but to go back to the same company.
About as unfair as you can get.
You couldn't top it much more than that, and it was a pretty and the real power. There were local merchants in the small community, but the real power was the downtown Water Street merchants in St. John's, who really advanced credit to some of the smaller merchants, and they really called the shots.
Yes, exactly. Thank goodness for unions, and we have a discussion about unions in Newfoundland. We cannot not talk about William Ford Coker and the union that he founded. Tell us a little bit about Coker.
Yeah, well, slightly before my time, but it was quite a remarkable accomplishment that he made. And I think it was another example of a match to a blasted bow. I mean, when he went around, when he had this idea, actually of a union broader than the fishery, his idea was a general, more of a general workers' union, but his primary work, of course, was in the fishery. And there was a very receptive audience for his message, especially on the northeast coast. That's where it really took off. And his message was to really empower people, and it went beyond, organizing into a union. They delved into politics and ran a number of candidates in provincial elections. They set up a shop. They built buildings in Port Union, some of which are still standing. The small small houses that they built to accommodate workers there, and it was a very ambitious undertaking, and for a period of time was really, like during World War I, when markets were strong, the union did extremely well. The post-war collapse of markets really was, to a large extent, its undoing. And it was, as fisheries minister, Coker introduced reforms into how the fishery is managed, some of which were pretty forward-thinking, but the market collapse, after the war really, put paid to that, and those regulations were spent force in fairly short order, and I'm not sure that Coker ever got his mojo back after that.
Do you think as well that the union probably wouldn't have survived really after his demise, because it was, to a large extent, I think, Coker's big personality, his leadership, that the skills he had as a politician were really what was kind of holding the union together. Do you think that?
Possibly. I mean, it is hard to know when you're looking back from long after the fact. It's interesting, just as a point of comparison between that union and ours, was that the FPU never attempted to negotiate the price of fish. They did work on things like trying to get independent cullers in place instead of the company cullers who had a vested interest in making sure that the cull favored the fish buyer.
Yes.
And one of the package of reforms that he was pushing was to implement, was to get independent cullers in place. Just as an example, but yeah, he had a larger-than-life kind of personality, it seems, and whether I don't know enough about the other leadership in the union to be able to say if somebody else might have come along, but I do know that, people said that about Richard Casham when he started, but there was lots of local rank-and-file leadership who emerged once given the opportunity to do so, and we had people who played a terrific role in the union once it got up. But you did need someone extraordinary to really get the ball rolling in the first instance.
So it seems that despite the importance of the fishery to the economy of Newfoundland over centuries, that successive governments have been as bad as fish merchants when it comes to ignoring the industry.
Well, certainly, probably the kindest thing you can say about a number of the governments, and some were better than others to deal with, but the kindest thing to say about a lot of them was that they were kind of confused and weren't quite sure what the hell to do with the fishery. And they seemed to have more firm ideas about, as the provincial governments, about what to do with matters in federal jurisdiction than they did about matters within their own jurisdiction. And perhaps they could have spent a little more time dwelling on stuff that they actually had the authority to deal with. But we had some ministers who were, pretty reasonable to deal with, and some who were, as one of our members put it one day, real doozies, and were tough to get stuff done with. I mean, I remember the Peckford government in 1980. There was the first ever province-wide strike lockout over fish prices, and this was only a few days in when he suggested a 30-day cooling off period, which he claimed was neutral. Well, it wouldn't have been neutral at all in its impact, because the timing would have been right smack in the middle of the peak of the fishery. So by the time that 30 days was over, certainly the trap fishery would have been over for sure, and we would have been, the impact of the 30 days would have been much more favorable to the companies than to the fishermen.
Just to go back a bit, the modern fishery union really had its genesis at St. Francis Xavier University when two Newfoundlanders met, and that's Cashin and McGraw. Talk about that.
Well, they overlapped at St. FX and became good friends. And really, after they got back, depending on which one you talk to, Des McGraw called Richard Cashin and said, "What about a fisherman's union? Why don't you come down to Port-au-Soie," which was where he was, where he had his parish. And it was the middle of winter, and Richard said he wasn't too enthused about that until Des said, "Well, look, what about a fisherman's union?" And he thought that was a marvelous idea, and in fact, Port-au-Soie was where they had the initial unions in what was at first called the Northern Fishermen's Union, but then of course it expanded to a province-wide union, and actually among the first members there, in addition to the fishermen down there, were the plant workers in Port-au-Soie.
In 1971, in the dying months of Joey Smallwood's government, he passed the Collective Bargaining Act. How significant was that for the union?
Oh, that was crucial. Now, it's too bad he didn't do it 20 years earlier, after Confederation, because the legislation he did bring in at the time was pretty namby-pamby as it relates to any rights for fishermen. But the Fishing Industry Collective Bargaining Act really finally gave the opportunity to negotiate fish prices. Now, it was really the fact that an election was around the corner, and it was obviously going to be very, very tight, that kind of focused his mind a bit on the need to do that, because of course the fishery is, a lot of the districts are fishing districts, and he wanted to shore up his support. But in any event, he eventually got a little bit kicking and screaming, decided to implement that legislation after being, a little bit kind of on the fence about it for quite some time. But it was crucial to the, to inshore harvesters having the right to negotiate their livelihood.
Now, I want to talk about a fish merchant, a quintessential fish merchant, Spencer Lake. He had a fish plant in Burgeo. He was the mayor of Burgeo. He owned many businesses in Burgeo, had a house in Burgeo and another house in Massachusetts where he also did business. He was the first fish merchant to go head to head with the union. And there's something called the Burgeo Showdown. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, and that was really in a lot of ways the making of the union. It could also have been the breaking of the union. There was a sign up there of plant workers, and out of 205 plant workers in the Burgeo plant, 105 signed union cards.
Wow.
Which means 100 didn't. And then when there was a vote, secret ballot vote conducted, those numbers held. And usually if you've only got that slight a margin, you'll have some slippage and the union won't be successful in a vote. But in this case, they held every vote. And the negotiations, in preparation for the book, I talked to the original local union president in Burgeo, rank and file guy named Luhan, and he said that the meetings they had, there was just no real negotiations to it, and they, came to the conclusion there's only one thing that was going to get the job done, was go on strike. And so there was a very bitter strike. Lake was extremely paternalistic, and one of his famous comments was to say, "I'm fond of the people of Burgeo, it's just that they're not capable of running their own affairs." And, which is a pretty paternalistic attitude to hold.
Well, that kind of tells you all you need to know about
Yes.
fish merchants.
Absolutely, and in particular this one. So he said he would never operate in Burgeo with a closed shop union. And I guess he was good to his word, because when he couldn't succeed in the strike, and he tried bringing in scabs to run the plant, he shut it down. And the government took it over. But it actually was the Moore's government that was just newly elected, which took over the plant and engaged National Sea Products from St. John's to come in and run it for the government, and eventually National Sea bought out the government's interest, and it became their plant.
Now, one of your early organizers, Earle, was a fellow named Ray Greening, and he was, by all accounts, an absolutely amazing organizer. Tell us about Ray.
Well, Ray he was an unassuming guy on the face of it, and he sort of flew under the radar with an awful lot of people. But those who knew him knew that he was made out of rebar. I mean, he was made out of strong stuff, and he was a great organizer, a phenomenal organizer. And when it became obvious that the dispute in Burgeo was really going to be a serious showdown, a make or break one for the union, Richard sent Ray in to be the union's point man in the community. Took him off his organizing, where he'd been tremendously successful, and sent him in to basically run the strike on the ground. The people in Burgeo had a very warm spot in their heart for Ray. Unfortunately, he died at the age of 43 in 1980 of cancer, which was a huge loss to the union and to the to working people in the province, because he was an outstanding trade unionist.
Yeah. I want to talk about Richard Cashin for a moment. So Richard Cashin had a career as a politician. He was a member of Parliament and well-connected Liberal. and he was a friend of the fisheries minister, Romeo LeBlanc. How much did this benefit the Union, having a leader with these kinds of connections?
Well, it was tremendously valuable. In particular, his connections with LeBlanc, but others in Ottawa as well. But LeBlanc was really a friend of the inshore fishermen, I think it's fair to say, and he didn't buy the corporate solution, the solution to every problem. And in the late 70s, when we still hadn't really recovered from the serious decline in cod and other groundfish resources caused by heavy overfishing, the Newfoundland and Nova Scotia provincial governments came forward with this harebrained scheme that Ottawa helped finance a $900 million boat building program, these boats being offshore trawlers to apply the waters, a bit further from shore. And LeBlanc noted that the existing trawler fleet was coming in with half loads, and he didn't really see the point of doubling the size of a fleet of vessels that's only bringing in half loads, which is kind of a sensible conclusion to come to. So he wouldn't support that. But in other ways as well, he was a friend. He was, for example, the federal government, when, and you asked about Richard's connections. Well, when the trawler strike, the famous trawler strike was settled finally in 1976, and there was the federal government contribute the equivalent of 2.5 cents a pound to the trawler companies to help finance the cost of the settlement. Then he campaigned hard and was eventually successful in getting equivalent payments paid to inshore fishermen for their catch. So for the first time ever, the payments were paid into the pockets of fishermen for cod and crab in this case. Historically, they'd used a kind of version of the so-called trickle-down theory. They give the money to the companies and claim that somehow some of the benefit would trickle down to the fish harvesters, which was a dubious claim on a good day.
Now, I want to talk about another confrontation. And this happened during the Peckford government, I believe, when there was a strike called by the union, and the only fish plant that managed to remain open was the fishery products plant in St. Anthony. And this led to a showdown between the plant and the company and the union, and two very big personalities were involved. There was Gus Etchegaray, representing fishery products, and Reg Anstey for the union. They were both on the ground in St. Anthony, this was a big kind of confrontation, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and there was a third very prominent personality who mightn't have got the public attention at the time, but Max Short, who went on to become an advisor to Brian Tobin when he was fisheries minister in Ottawa. At the time, he was our staff representative on the Northern Peninsula, and Max was really our guy on the ground throughout. And when the company succeeded in getting a trickle of fish into the plant, when all the plants represented by the Fisheries Association of Newfoundland and Labrador were shut down. The union strategically struck a few plants, and then the final member companies, of which there were 21, I think, at the time. They shut down all the others, which sure helped in the logistics of the strike, because we only had to worry about a few locations because the company put the padlocks on the others. But when Etchegaray got a trickle of fish in the St. Anthony plant, and that's all it was, the companies reopened the doors for one day, and I think they thought that the harvesters would come flooding back, and instead the numbers of people who showed up I mean, there was a huge crowd, for example, at Old Perlican, in the order of 300 people who went down and said, no way are we going back on the terms that are presently on offer. And within a day, they had closed their doors, and in St. Anthony, it took it was pretty close to a riot down there. I mean, it was really got very, very tense. The police were on hand. They told Reg and Max, look, we're not going to be able to control this. And eventually Max took a group of the fishermen in to meet the manager, because Max had tried calling Etchegaray directly. He said, look, you got to close this down, or there's not going to be a good scene. And Etchegaray refused, and then he finally convinced the manager, who was there, and he could see with his own eyes firsthand that this was really a dangerous situation. And he phoned Etchegaray, managed to convince him, look, you got to shut this down. It's not worth it. And so eventually that led to that plant closing down, and it was really only a matter of days after that that was the turning point, and the thing was settled within a few days.
Well, Earle, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but for the folks viewing, this book is full of great stories like that, and it's well worth a read. A Match to a Blasty Bow by Earle McCurdy. And Earle, thanks very much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, Karl. I enjoyed it.
And we will see you again next time.